Yeah. So we've been, I guess, just moving it right along. We went from, I mean, just looking back at our day, we went from, figuring out what the right media players are, asking the right questions to really find the right CMS softwares. And then like we've gotten into kind of more of the ROI, obviously, talking about the money, and the
Yes.
ROO. And now we're looking at scalability and the longevity of the digital signage system with this other session, this next session, which is called Future Proofing a Digital Signage System. Okay, and I think one of the coolest things I love I love the hyphenated two words. They're two words, but they're hyphenated. But future proofing, because I guess once a digital signage network is installed, it rarely even gets smaller. Usually within a year, the organization who deploys it wants it to grow because they see the efficacy of it. They're like, let's go, let's keep going. So, finding the right type of the right hardware, the right software that will scale and evolve with the demand is extremely important. And so this session will address how to do this, as well as the maintenance of the contracts, network changes, capacity, and evaluating financing options with the client. So this is going to be really cool. And just a nice little note, if you guys remember Sandi Stambaugh of Signage, she's coming back to moderate the panel. So I'm super excited to bring. Hey there.
How are you?
Well, I'm going to go ahead. Good. It's so good to see you back. And I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce the rest of the panel because we have a pretty star-studded panel today. And if there's any time at the end, I will come back at the end to ask some live audience questions. Sound good?
That sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today for day 2 of design. So it's been a busy day, lots to learn. But anyway, so our session here is on future proofing our digital signage network. I'm Sandi Stambaugh, Vice President of at Signage Corporation, and I've been with the company about 18 years. I'm responsible for our visual solutions business, our collaboration practice, and some specialized mobility. I'm so excited to be joined today by 2 industry experts from our partner Diversified. Mitch and TJ bring years of experience in all facets of developing and managing digital signage networks, and we're so lucky to hear their insights today. So welcome, TJ and Mitch.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'm actually going to give you guys a second to introduce yourselves and maybe give a little bit about your background and kind of what you do there at Diversified as it pertains to the topic today. So I'll start with you, Mitch.
Sure. My name is Mitch Mittler. I'm the Vice President for sales for design and technology with our digital media group. So that's the group TJ and I are both with. Our specialty is specifically working in digital signage, large format, experiential projects is what our group within Diversified specializes in. So I work with some direct customers, a lot of our sales account executives on the sales team on helping them identify what technology will meet their customers' needs for signage and large format display.
Perfect. Great. Okay, TJ, you're up.
I'm TJ DiQuollo, Director of Creative Services within Media Group. Been with Diversified for just about 13 years, work closely with Mitch. My responsibilities are really looking holistically at client needs and determining what content management systems they should be putting in. So content management and operating those networks falls within my team's responsibility, but also, as the title says, creative services, making content, whether it's passive, interactive, or dynamic, and helping our clients achieve their long-term visions within their network.
That's great. Well, good. Well, thank you guys for being here today. We got a lot to talk about, so I think this time's going to go pretty fast. But I guess I'll just start us off with kind of talking about the setup. As you guys are talking to a new customer or even with an existing network, Mitch, when you're talking to them, where do you start when you're thinking about building out that network and ensuring longevity and scalability from a technology perspective?
Sure. So the first thing to typically try and find out from them is, what are their goals? What is the goal of this network? Is it a advertising-based network and looking for a financial return on investment? Is it corporate communications where they're really just looking to communicate, message out to their customers, so it's more of a perceived ROI. Is this a brand network that's only going to show their brand content? So it's needs to meet the brand goals and focus on those brand goals. So like to identify what that is up front, and then a lot of it's collaborative, working with the construction teams and the marketing teams or advertising teams, and bringing TJ and his team in to say, okay, how do we get you to that vision? What are you looking to do? Where does it make the most sense to put some sort of visual element? What is that visual element? Try and really work collaboratively with them and be a true partner with them. Determine how can we help them see that journey from when somebody enters that whatever the space is, whether it's a retail space, a transit hub, an airport, whatever it is. How do we get those messages across effectively and efficiently to whoever the end customer is? And the end customer is always different. Again, it could be consumers, it could be employees. So we like to start there, and then from there we can work with them to determine what the right technology for the space is. Are they someone who's looking at we do if it's a retail store, they may be doing 3-year refreshes. Well, we want to make sure we gauge it to the right product that's going to give them what they need for that type of cycle, versus it could be someone else who does more of a 5-year refresh and they need a longer term program. On a large format spectacular, we could be looking at anywhere between 7 and 10 years that we're trying to keep that technology piece going. And we want to make sure that we specify the right level of product to achieve the goal, but also maintain that they're not a surprise day 2 that, there's recurring. There's something else that happens. And so it's really understanding the customer, their goals, their needs, and working with them to make sure they get a program that's going to fit those long-term goals.
Yeah, and so as you're having these conversations, are there certain technology considerations? Are there certain things that you really you have to make sure are addressed on the front end versus kind of once the network's implemented and things start to progress?
Oh, absolutely. So, from a technology side, we want to make sure they've got the network infrastructure, the network support team, the support, everything runs on a network. So we want to make sure that they, that's in place, whether they're providing themselves or we need to build that as part of the project. Other technology things, power. A lot of, if they go to large format, they do draw a amount of power. There is a cost to that, so they need to have that in place. So there's a lot of factors we need to roll through with them.
Yeah,
The
for
technology.
Sure.
Also lifespan of the product. Depends on we can get products for are they a 5-day-a-week store? Or are they a 24/7 operation? So that's going to determine what product we're going to use and what level of product, and that's going to affect their capital costs as well as their operating.
Yeah. So TJ, what about on your side? So on the kind of building out the creative plan and the content for a new network, are there also considerations that need to be made around future proofing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I talk to my clients, I always like to tell them we need to start with the end, right? Because the reason these networks are going in, the reason we're putting up LEDs and signs is to communicate with audiences, put content out there. And if you don't have a clear vision for what you're trying to do with the technology, it's hard, A, to future-proof it, and B, it's hard to maintain it as it goes, because there's a lot of considerations that need to be taken for who's going to be making the content, how often, who's in charge of really distributing it and running the network from an operational standpoint. And if you don't have a lot of those governances and that plan over the next year at least in place, it's difficult to show value in the network if you're not using it to its full potential. Now, when we start with the end in mind, we're really talking about what do we want to do with that message, and how is the software and the technology going to enable you to do what you want with that message. So if a client comes and said, yeah, right now we really just want to put some JPEGs on a screen and say go this way, I try to probe them, like, well, what about a year from now? What about as the network grows, leadership sees value, the messages are resonating, what else do you want to do with that? And that's when they start, well, maybe we can bring in some dynamic stuff, some interactive stuff. Okay, let's go through all your use cases, live TV, live streaming, all these variables that I do from a consulting perspective will help me line up what software would be best for them. So what can the software support within their creative vision, how the software works within their current team's workflow, and then pair that software in the creative use cases with the hardware working with Mitch to determine the right ultimate whole package to put into place. So it's always with the end in mind, and you build backward. If you don't have a clear vision for where you see your network growing, it's near impossible to future-proof it. So you have to, like the name suggests, look into the future.
And the content plan, that end goal from the visual that TJ's got in mind there, has to work with the technology. They have to be planned together. It can't be just, we're going to put a screen on the wall. We'll figure it out later. We're not. We just got to get the construction budget in. It has to have that vision. Has to be part of that process. Or you're putting a screen on a wall to put a screen on a wall, and that's not going to give you any return on investment.
We've seen hardware get put in, and that hardware fit the plan for what it was doing and where they wanted to start. But as soon as they started adding more complexities, sometimes that hardware is just not capable of rendering what they want it to do. So now, even before that 3-year refresh that Mitch was talking about, now you're limiting what you can do with the system when you're not considering putting a little bit more investment up front in the hardware to grow with your vision over the years.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of those limitations on the front end really are about budgets, right? So coming up with that, capital expenditure, operational, right? So that's something that I definitely wanted to go to next, Mitch, is just, how does the use of both operational and then also capital budgets impact the ability to maximize the relevance and then also the scalability of the network? What are you guys seeing there?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things I think we've seen there with budgets is the operations team is not involved with the construction side of things. So construction's concerned, they've got a budget, I've got to build X. And if you don't have that operating team, whether it's the creative services team, the content team, or just the folks who are, responsible for keeping things up and running, and taking care of the service contracts, if they're not talking early on in the project, things can go haywire really quickly, because you'll wind up saying, construction's done, here you go, here's the keys to the store. And then you have another group going, okay, what did I inherit? How am I going to deal with this? So really having them involved so they can do their fiscal planning, as well as making sure you're meeting whatever it's determined up front. And that content piece of it's a big piece of it as well, because there is a recurring cost to content. And different programs have different ways of funding that. Sometimes it's in retail, sometimes it's by campaign, sometimes it could be by product group, depending on what kind of retail space it is. It could be by product. If you're out of home, it's by advertiser. But it's really understanding what those ongoing costs, not just your one-time costs up front that are going to affect the build budget, but what are those ongoing costs for, content, service? Service is one people do forget about. Sometimes that does get captured up front for a few years, but when that service agreement ends and somebody says, that was 3 years ago, it's year 4, that tends to get forgotten. And it needs to be, made sure that team knows going through. And another piece was, staffs change, people change. That is being communicated through the process of that. Hey, you're running out. You're coming up on a renewal, or making sure that people understand it's coming and not saying, hey, it's due tomorrow, and they don't know it. So like most things, it's communication. It's making sure there's a plan, and everybody's executing that plan on their piece of the plan.
Yeah, it's a lot of collaboration, isn't it? it's a lot more than sticking a screen up on a wall, that's for sure.
Yeah, so it's a lot more than a data outlet and a power outlet.
Yeah, right. So TJ, and then as you're looking at budgets and how that Mitch talked about it a little bit, but what best practice are you seeing, with leveraging those budgets to provide managed services and then long-term content planning and then also refresh?
Right. So just like Mitch said, it varies based on the client, but more importantly, the application or the industry that we're in. Right. So you're looking at an enterprise network doing corporate communication. There's probably a good plan for the content refresh that'd be happening almost weekly. advertising, of course.
I think we lost TJ there for a moment.
I think he's frozen. You probably know what he was saying, don't you, Mitch? You want to jump in?
Sure. So it's making sure it's about the content plan. Make sure whether that content's being refreshed weekly, monthly. That there's a plan behind that content, and it's timely. And there's a bunch of techniques for that. You can use. There's some really great subscription services out there that can be used, and some of it is marketing. Making sure the marketing teams. A lot of the marketing teams will have a piece of their budget available to. We'll have a marketing budget available to them, where they know that they need to budget in for every time there's a new campaign, new product launch. That there's a piece of the budget that is carved out for that content. HR on the enterprise side, having HR, getting HR into having a cadence for content is really important. That they that they're refreshing. Seeing the same message over and over, it becomes a background. Nobody looks at it. So it needs to have some element of change to it. Even if you have standard formatting, sometimes you need to change it a little bit so it catches people's eyes. Even when you come up with your branding, your theming. But that also requires a budget and resources.
Yeah. So would you say that the best practice from a budgetary perspective is blended? Is it a blended CapEx, OpEx approach, or what's your opinion on that?
It is a bit of a blended, but it's a lot. Most of the time, we see the content is considered an operational expense, versus a capital expense, where it's coming out of somebody, but it's somebody having, and a lot of it has to do with resources. It's always finding who's the guy. There's always somebody who has to actually take ownership of it, and that piece sometimes can get lost, and that's sometimes that's when things will get outsourced occasionally. And they'll outsource to us to support that content because they may not have that resource, or that resource goes on vacation, or it gets put on a temporary assignment and needs somebody to fill the role. So it's making sure they have those bits and pieces.
Well, great. Here's TJ back just in time for
his follow-up question. Did you hear my complete great answer that I gave, or did you miss it?
What's so great is you guys work so closely together. Mitch just jumped right in for you, so it worked out.
Perfect.
So I do have a follow-up question though, Mitch, TJ, around content trends and kind of just market trends as a whole. But what are you seeing around content trends that is kind of new that maybe should be considered and part of planning a new or a refreshed digital signage network? Are there, any considerations regarding like COVID-19 or return to public spaces or anything like that you're seeing that might be interesting?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of, I wouldn't say new, but we're seeing a lot of trends now post-COVID to try to make things touchless, because that was always a big concern, especially in the front with touchscreens. And how do we make sure that the touchscreens our clients have can also be operated without touch? So looking at some cool technology that you can leverage your cell phone to be a mouse cursor on the screen and establish a one-to-one connection with that touch screen and be able to control it from your phone, which is super cool. There's a few companies out there doing a really great job at doing that. Voice activated, we've always heard of being talked about in the industry for a while, like Siri, Google Assistant, Alexa type voice activation and voice control for interactive screens. Gesture, again, technology that's been around, but finding a more applicable reason to be used in these situations, as opposed to, wow, that would be cool. Now it's, wow, we kind of need this, so let's hunker down and really make it work. So those trends are definitely at the forefront across the board in this post-COVID environment, as we're trying to bring people back to work and back to public spaces. And I think it's really cool because that technology was always really exciting to me, but you had hesitation. It was slightly new technology. People maybe didn't want to put it in, but now we're past that. The technology's gotten a lot better in the past year or two, and people are motivated to put that stuff in there. So I think that's really great. in a COVID trend. But content trends in general, making content more purposeful, making it more attractive and more, in my opinion, a little bit more abstract. Instead of hitting somebody on the hammer with your message, kind of disguising it a little bit. And again, going back to where the screens are and what we're doing, I'm spending a lot of time focusing on large lobbies again and making experiences for audiences, is really going back to the generative content, dynamic content that is more artful and more creating an atmosphere and displaying company data in a unique and exciting way that can't be duplicated from one business to another business because it's their personal data, and creating some really beautiful lobby experiences out of that through data visualization. So generative and interactive content, I think we're going to see, and I hope to see, a lot more of, because I like working on those projects as well.
Yeah, sounds like fun. Creating those really cool immersive experiences, right? So whether it's in corporate or retail or other. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that the other day, didn't we? So Mitch, on the, keeping on that same path of trends that we're seeing, there's so much, being talked about around things like AI and analytics, and, certainly as TJ touched on, touchless environments. Things like 5G, and then certainly throwing in, a little bit of network security as well. So can you talk specifically about what you're seeing and, what as you're building out new networks or even coming into existing and doing some refresh, what are you thinking about as far as, technology and the trends there?
Sure. So a lot, some of it is COVID driven. So we're seeing some, more interest in the gesture based interactive, touchless interactive. So whether that's truly motion tracking or having people connect, using their phones to be the user interface, so they're using their own device versus touching a touchscreen. Though I think that's going to come back. That'll come back quickly. We'll all be back in those spaces in time. So I think that's going to come back, and we're not seeing people not, as TJ mentioned, lobbies are, we're doing a lot of lobby refreshes. People, a lot of real estate taking advantage of spaces being empty, saying, hey, what can we've got this, got the access for a few more months. What can we do while we can do that? So what can we do to entice people to our spaces? And it's, yes, it's high pitch, pixel pitch on LED. It was, hey, do a 4 millimeter, do a 2.5 millimeter. Now we're in the, pretty standardly doing this stuff in the 1 to 2 millimeter pitch. It's integrating lighting to it. It's really now it's not just displays anymore. It's lighting, it's sound. It's really that immersive environment. We can tie with LED lighting fixtures. We can tie a lighting fixture into this video system just as easily as as putting another screen on the wall. So now the whole environment can be rethemed. Laser phosphor projectors has given us the ability to start doing more with projection, whether that's full-on projection mapping, or just doing specific pieces of it, just using it as another tool in the toolbox. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that. I think we're going to see a lot more of remote workforce. So how does digital signage adapt to that? We're working with customers now that they're bringing that to the desktop and using some of the CMS systems have a component that allows us to bring that messaging to the desktop for the remote workforce, where it had been a thing to do before. There's a little more push on it now because there's going to be a trend for a while that people are going to be whether they're fully remote or really not in the office 5 days a week, maybe 3 days or 2 days a week, but you still need to communicate with your employees. So using using a consistent technology platform but using different visual media to get those messages out. So we're seeing more and more of that.
All right, I'm in. It looks like I'm in.
We've got Jeffrey, who took over TJ.
You never know what you're going to run into.
Live TV.
We knew we were the place to be, didn't we? So that's so great. You guys, thanks so much for that information. And I want to kind of end real quick. We've got about 3 minutes left. I want to just give you guys an opportunity to talk about two things. Number one is the biggest mistake that you're seeing when folks are either not future-proofing or trying to future-proof a network. And then number two would be, what recommendation do you have And you know, we'll split this all. PJ, I'll let you go first. So we'll start with you. Give Mitch a second to breathe. But on the technology side, so biggest mistake and you know, recommendation.
I think we touched on it before. The biggest mistake, in my opinion, that I'm seeing is taking the inexpensive route, finding the always going with the most budget-friendly hardware and the budget-friendly software, not fully recognizing where you want the system to go, and just planning for the least common denominator. I mean, you can always swap out bits of the hardware in the network when needed if you need a more powerful PC for one thing, but don't make all your decisions on what's the simplest and cheapest to get. Really, I mean, I want every bell and whistle on everything that I ever get. You may not have to go to that extreme, but find somewhere in the middle. Don't sell yourself short.
Okay, great. All right, Mitch, you're up.
Biggest thing I think is it is more people not understanding, you know, being prepared for the continuing operation, seeing it as a short term, not looking long term at what they're looking to do, not being prepared for those support maintenance, not being prepared for content, thinking, oh, we're just going to do this, and when we're done, it's done. So I think that, you know, not looking further than you know, looking at far enough of that horizon. They really need to go a bit further out and be prepared for that.
Yeah, looking at like the immediate need or the immediate problem they're trying to solve versus what might be coming. That makes sense.
Yeah, and that plan's going to change over time. Even if they have a plan, it's going to be modified, but not having a long-range plan.
Yeah. You know, well, that's good feedback. So we heard a lot about collaboration. Definitely looking at not just, you know, throwing hardware out there, but making sure that we were really thinking about the content piece and what we're trying to communicate and how we're trying to utilize the network, right? And then also thinking about things like the analytics and the, you know, the customer experience, the fun stuff TJ gets to do, right? The customer experience and creating those immersive areas. There's so much fun stuff coming in the digital signage space, and you know, I know we've talked about this before. We talked about it last week when we were preparing for this, about how you know, how exciting it is right now to be in this space and how much growth we expect to see, you know, coming out of where we've been, right? So I just so appreciate you guys being here today and giving some of your insights. You guys are you know, living it every day, and you know, the experts have been doing this a long time. So I really appreciate you guys coming forward and talking with us today, for sure.
Great. Well, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank you so much, Sandy. We appreciate everybody for sharing. And actually, before you guys leave, I had a couple of questions, if you guys don't mind. Actually, one specific audience question, and if we have time for another, I'll throw out another one as well. I have one with Norman Plant asks, I work for a private university in Michigan, and we want to utilize digital signage for the first time. We don't know what we don't know.
Great point.
Right. What tools or info are available to help us initiate this process?
Sure. I mean, so obviously the DFS website, there's a lot of Avixa has got a lot of information up on their site where you can reach out. Rave is a good resource as well. You can reach out to us. We'd be, you know, happy to talk to you. But you know, if there's a lot of, I'm not prepared with any specific ones, but there are a lot of good resources out there. I would say that really talk to your team. Start thinking about your campus. Start thinking about your buildings. Where you want to message people. What do you want to message them? Start thinking about it. Think of it from the point of the person looking at the screen. If I'm standing in building A at the front door, what information do I need? What do you want to communicate to them? If they're going into a dorm, what do you need to communicate with them there? Really think about what your content needs to be. Your format, your layout, what the right screen, that'll all come. But start thinking about really who's your audience, what do you need to communicate to them, and where are you going to communicate to them?
Yeah, and look at what other people in similar environments are doing. Notice what you like or don't like about them. And as Mitch said, you know, start consulting internally. Come up with a strategy and approach and objectives. There's a lot of resources online. You can look up digital signage softwares, or like Mitch said, you can get a consultant to help pair the right software to your requirements. And you can even hire consultants to help write those requirements for you. But if you're looking at the market space and you're seeing what other people are doing and where you want to improve and what you may not need, document all that, do your research for software features, and determine which one works best for you.
Perfect. All right. Anybody else want to add anything, or we can move along from there? I know that's a pretty general question, so it's like, well, there's so many resources, but it sounds like starting with why and maybe getting a little bit of insight and seeing what other people are doing and what you enjoy is where you can start, and then really trying to look for the right partners for you and the right resources so that you can connect and get on with your project is what it sounds like. So I have another question, actually. We've got just a little bit under 2 minutes, and I'm really into generative content. I've actually got an opportunity to write about some generative content, and I get excited about it. I mean, Sandi, I know you said that you get excited about it too. It's just so cool, and I don't know if maybe there are some first timers that have not been exposed to generative content. If anybody could give a little bit, maybe an example or like a case study of one of the vertical markets. I know that Avixa has served. We've done a lot of work within the retail, segment and covering some of that. But if anybody wants to speak to generative content, maybe what that is, and maybe some of the key stakeholders and players that might need to come into place to make sure that you have something like that type of content that will give you that kind of longevity. I would love to hear from you guys.
Sure. So generative content is content that's essentially being generated on the fly from external sources. Those external sources could be data points, data feeds coming in with a sliding scale of how it affects the image on the screen, or the art that's happening on the screen. It could be sensors. It could be any magnitude of inputs, and those inputs are consistently changing the content on a daily basis. So if you're building generative content, there's a chance when you look at it, you'll never really see the same experience. So it's a good way to invest in beautiful content, but add longevity to that beautiful content because it is always changing and being generated on the fly. I see that a lot in the lobby spaces because you're building those experiences and building that atmosphere, and you can get really abstract and really purposeful, and it's just something that has legs as opposed to video production. And there's a lot of great software partners that we have and a lot of great tools out there that make creating generative experiences relatively easily. And there's a lot of great agencies that do wonderful work, programming in Unreal Engine or Unity or Cinder. But it's all about not having to manage that content on a day-to-day basis and giving repeat audiences and new audiences something new and exciting to look at when they come in.
Right. So it's not like something is just on loop over and over again.
Correct.
It's something that's evolving
Correct.
and changing. Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate all the feedback, and we're going to kick it to our next session. That was phenomenal. So thank you guys.